Welcome to the Burning Archive. Have you walked into your local bookshop or browsed Amazon lately and seen all the Russian books? It's way too much to read. What if I told you you could push all these books aside and read just one book and really get started on a better understanding of Russian history and Russia today? Would that be helpful? What book should I read to get started on Russian history? That is the question on today's Burning Archive. Don't worry, no books were harmed in the shooting of this video. So with the war in Ukraine, with the conflict between NATO and Russia, there's been a surge of interest in the history of both warring parties, Russia and Ukraine. And people are looking for explanations about how all of this happened. Is Putin evil? Does he want to bring back the Russian Empire? What is the joint history of Russia and Ukraine? Do Russians love authoritarianism and war and vodka? And what is the Russian side of the story? A lot of people are riding the wave of interest and desire to paint Russia as either the good guy or the bad guy. So it can be quite confusing when you go to the bookshop and you're trying to work out what should I read. And a lot of the books can probably mislead you as well. Former intelligence officers, former Russian oligarchs, all sorts of perhaps not such reliable characters are putting books out there about Russia. And a lot of these books don't really give Russians a voice in their own history. So I'm going to suggest that you push away the cornucopia of history books on Russia and choose just one book. Reset your understanding of Russia and history and Russia today to try to look afresh at the story of Russia. And that book is by Mark B. Smith, The Russia Anxiety and How History Can Resolve It. And what makes this book so special? It tackles head-on the very dominant Russophobia or anti-Russian sentiment that may have some good grounds and may have some extremes. That's so common in, I guess, the Western media and even in Western intellectual circles, even in Western history circles. And it gives that sentiment a different name. He calls it the Russia Anxiety, and he really describes a centuries-long pattern of Western attitudes to Russia cycling between fear, hatred, and disregard, even contempt. It lays out what he describes as a black legend of Russian history, and while recognizing the strengths of that legend, the black legend tells the story of Russia as a history of dictatorship, violence, terror, passive acceptance of authoritarianism, and endless suffering. And it turns Russia into a bit of a caricature that's routinely trotted out in the media, a caricature where its destiny is dictatorship. And what Mark Smith does brilliantly is he recognises some of the truths of all the work that's been done in Russian history that has fed into this black legend some real truths to the story, and real profound insights into history, but he says it is all a much more complex picture than that. So he takes people from where they are in the common understandings of what Russia is and shows a different path. He sets out what he calls a counter-narrative that provides an alternative history of all the choices and the contingencies and the different paths that were followed over the last 6,000 years of Russia's history. And he also explores a thematic discussion of Russian history that focuses in on glimpses of tragedy, highlights of comedy and Russian humour, and trolling is legendary, and the many shades of grey in Russian history. In this section of the book, he explores some very interesting answers to 5 key questions that Western historians, but more importantly, Western leaders, Western media organisations, the general Western public often assume there are often assume quite cliched answers to these questions. Does Russia's past offer democratic prospects? Is Russia built on a history of violence? Has Russia ever been part of the West? Is expansionism in Russia's DNA? Does history make Russians seek war or peace? He talks about the complexity of both the Stalin inheritance and the Putin prospect, and he shows the many possibilities of Russian history, the choices of Gorbachev or Speransky or others for a different path for Russia, and he also shows Russians' deep and complex relationship and self-understanding of their own history. He shows history as what he calls a multi-layered cake. There's no simple answer to of what is the nature of Russia, the story of Russia, when Russia is such a complex, varied, and dynamic civilization. And he also makes a great case for how history can be used for living better in the present. He shows how history can resolve the Russian anxiety. He shows how history can enrich our empathy, enrich our understanding of a people and a leadership and a government that we may regard as enemies or even the incarnation of evil. So if you read this book first, it will reframe how you read everything else on Russian history and make you a lot more culturally literate and empathetic with the past and empathetic with the peoples of Russia today. And I feel we all urgently need in Western countries a better understanding of Russia. Our leaders have made some miscalculations and rushed into a new charge of the Light Brigade in a new Crimean War, and it has brought suffering on the people of Ukraine, suffering on the people of Russia, suffering on the people of the West and of the global South. We should not say ours is not to reason why, ours is but to do and die. Let's not charge into that valley of death of a long war against Russia. let's read The Russia Anxiety and learn how the history of Russia, the many possibilities of Russia, can help you live your life as a citizen caught up in this conflict better. And if you do that, you might also want to check out my videos on the Black Legend of Russian history, or my podcasts as well on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And in those videos, I go into more detail. This great book by Mark P. Smith, The Russia Anxiety, and how history can resolve it.